So we came down. We went on Rise of the Resistance, and for your listeners, it's a Star Wars themed attraction, and it really is. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Then we went over to Animal Kingdom and went on Flight of Passage. The key here is that I didn't really have any kind of emotional connection to Avatar. I mean, I'd seen it, but it wasn't kind of that emotional connection to Star Wars. So my son and I went on the ride, and I had no idea what to expect. So I was sitting there, and the after this amazingly detailed queue, and the wall went up, and we flew down into Pandora. And every time I tell this story, I'm not kidding you. Like even now, I start to get goosebumps.
Well, I have the pleasure today of being with two amazing people who I can't wait to share our conversation with. One of them you've seen before. Theron Skees is with us today. He's a main contributor, and James Warda is the author of How Does Disney Do That? And, in full disclosure, I was able to contribute to it, which we'll talk a little bit more as we have our conversation. But welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thanks, Lawrence. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here
Yes.
again.
My pleasure. So, you know what? Can each of you, just so our listeners have a little bit of background, and I'll start with you, James, first, just to give our audience a little bit of who you are, what you do, kind of leading up to the point of the book, which we'll spend plenty of time on. But maybe you could share with our listeners a little background about yourself and what brought you up to the point of publishing and writing the book.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lawrence. My story begins back in the 1400s. No, just kidding. The joke never actually works, but I try it. My background is actually there's two pieces to it. Corporate communications. So I was in the field for 25, 30 years, and so PR, marketing, but also have been a writer. Have written for several Disney magazines, WDW magazine, etc. And have been a long time Disney fan since I got married. So that all kind of led up, and I have a previous book that I wrote called "Where Are We Going So Fast?" And so that all led up to where I am today.
Okay. And Theron, just so we could share your background again, I know you've been on here before, but it'd be great if you could share your background because I think it's fascinating and definitely a lot of value add to this book from your background as well.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here again and to be talking with your listeners again. I have 30 years of experience in the themed entertainment business. It's a pretty large industry. Started in film, did some work with Universal Studios, but the bulk of my career was with Walt Disney Imagineering, 23 years, and had the good pleasure of being in creative leadership with them for that entire time, and spent some time all over the world telling stories to different cultures and representing that in many different ways, attractions, hotels, cruise ships, and got a chance to do a lot of really fun things. But I have to say, collaboration is the magic that makes all that happen. So collaborating with James on something like this book to be able to bring it to audiences was definitely a highlight of that career.
Yeah, amazing. And I love the book. It was great. And, how did you guys come together? I don't know which one of you want to take that, but, obviously you're both playing in the Disney sandbox, so to speak, to some degree, but how'd that come to be?
Well, I can start that story, Lawrence, and then I'll hand it off to Theron. So I until about 3 years ago, I lived in Illinois with my wife. Our middle son lived down here in Florida, where I am now. And about 3 years ago, I think the pandemic was easing up a bit. It's hard to remember, but he was on the phone with us, and he said you have to come down and go on two relatively new rides at Disney World, Rise of the Resistance and Flight of Passage. But he then said something which I believe if he hadn't said it, we might not be here right now. He said, "Don't look at any videos. Don't watch anything about them." And I'll explain why that's important later. So we came down. We went on Rise of the Resistance, and for your listeners, it's a Star Wars themed attraction, and it really is. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Then we went over to Animal Kingdom and went on Flight of Passage. The key here is that I didn't really have any kind of emotional connection to Avatar. I mean, I'd seen it, but it wasn't kind of that emotional connection to Star Wars. So my son and I went on the ride, and I had no idea what to expect. So I was sitting there, and the after this amazingly detailed queue, and the wall went up, and we flew down into Pandora. And every time I tell this story, I'm not kidding you. Like even now, I start to get goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting them right now. It shows you the power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking around. We're flying around Pandora, and at one point I started to tear up. And I'm like, you notice I don't say cry. I have to say the more macho tear up. But I started to tear up. I'm like, what the heck is going on? 57-year-old guy on a Disney ride crying. So, after a few more moments, I realized I was feeling this feeling of like wonder. And I realized it was childlike wonder, and we don't get to experience that much as adults.
Right.
So I got off the ride, was walking out. I remember it exactly in my head going, how does Disney do that? And I knew I didn't mean just the method. So what were the gears? What were the
Mm-hmm.
sounds?
Right.
It was that, how did those people who designed it, brought it to life and sustain it, how did they make me feel this way? So after that, I was writing for the Chicago Tribune at the time and wrote for my blog with them. I said, I'm a writer, so I had to write about the experience. So I was a little embarrassed, but I wrote it. I'm like, what am I going to hear back? And literally within a day or two, I'm hearing back over 100 replies, men and women saying they had cried on Disney rides, especially Flight of Passage. And then a few weeks later, I'm watching the Imagineering story on Disney Plus, and I see Imagineers tearing up about the rides, the attractions they created. I'm like, huh. Then I'm on LinkedIn. I do not get a commission from LinkedIn when I say this. I was on LinkedIn and I saw a post from the Disney Institute with a video about Disney Springs transformation. And I watched it, and there's Theron, who oversaw the Disney Springs transformation. And it was a great video. And I just commented on it. I said something, I can't remember what I said actually. And at that point, I will turn it over to Theron.
Well, James reached out to me and it said something like it was great, cool video. We began a bit of a dialogue, and I said, "Hey, look, if you ever want to, collaborate, let's talk about it. Let's get deeper." And so that's really how it started. Our relationship began that way, and then we did a couple of Zoom sessions, and James told me about the experience, and literally we began a conversation. And then we began recording the conversations, of which we have 3 years worth of recorded conversations. The coolest thing of all that I think both of us experienced was, as a fan of themed experiences, a fan of Disney experiences, as he was experiencing that and asking the question, how does this happen? He was surprised to find out that, as a former Imagineer, as somebody who participates in creating those kinds of attractions, I wasn't on the Pandora team, but contributed to many other forms of attractions like that. He was surprised to hear that Imagineers want to know how the guests feel. We spend 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, many years really working hard to ensure that Disney attractions make this emotional connection with guests. And Lawrence, you know how projects are, right? One Friday you're finish a project, Monday you're on the next project, and it doesn't matter if it was 5 years. So you don't have a chance to go back and really sit with the guests and say, "Did you like what we decided?" We, did this work? Did that work? So that magic happened as we spoke and discovered that we kind of were looking for the other's feedback in a broader way. And I don't know, it was kind of magical. And
Oh,
3 years later, here we are.
Yeah. So LinkedIn works, right? It connected you guys. It brought you together. And James, maybe LinkedIn doesn't want, a plug or a compensation for you mentioning them. They might want a piece of the book for putting this all together for you. You never know. It might be the other way around. So let's keep it between us.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I think that's a great story. So how did I understand, I guess, the background, James, you went on Pandora, had this experience that really touched you, and you were really curious about the question, which ultimately became the question behind the book. How does Disney do that? How did that concept all come about through those conversations? What was really the impetus to move there? And really, what are you trying to drive out of the readers? What are you trying to accomplish there?
Yeah, I think the move. We moved down to Florida. My wife loves the sun, and we'd been coming here since we got married. We brought the kids every few years to Disney World, and then every year, and then we were going on Disney cruises, and that's where I have a chapter in the book about it, like how do you when did I fall in love with Disney? And it's like I think it's just like falling in love with anybody or whatever. It's like you're not quite sure when it happened. But as Theron and I were talking, it just started to kind of percolate, I think, for he and I. And we launched two groups. So we launched online groups on Facebook and LinkedIn and started to just hear, people were excited about it. It started small and it started organically. But we realized it's like, hey, there's a conversation going on here. And what if we allowed everybody, not allowed, but brought everyone else into that conversation? I mean, where else do you get a chance for the people who experience it and the people who create it to actually like talk to each other?
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of joke with Theron, when I used to see Imagineers around the park, it's like seeing Elvis, it's like, it's exciting. And I think if I were in Theron's shoes, I'd be like, boy, I really want to talk to them. They just went on my attraction. I want to see how they're doing. So started doing interviews after that, and just I don't know. I always kind of maybe it sounds a little cheesy, but it's true. Walt has always been a real inspiration to me, and it almost feels like he's sometimes in this room right here. He stood right over this shoulder when I
Mm-hmm.
was writing the book, and there were many times where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'd written one book, but that was like 20 years ago. And I'm like, okay. And he would just, he'd kind of inspire me to keep going. And I would talk to one person, they would connect me with the next person. And they were all really generous and they'd connect me with the next. And I'd start talking. And, these stories just start coming. So, that's how I had an idea for the book. I worked on that idea with my wife. We talked it through. You're all of anyone who reads the book is very lucky that my wife had a major involvement in it. Because if I'd written it the way I was originally going to write it, it might have been like a white paper. It was. I mean, I talk about I talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Yeah.
in one chapter, and so, but it went from so she helped me remember it should be fun too.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of that's how that whole thing started.
And Theron, we talked a little bit about before we started recording, that there's this real application for, business owners, I think, and businesses and entrepreneurs to really learn from this book. Because if you think about it, if an attraction can have the impact that it had on James, and I'm not picking on you, James, this happens to hundreds, if not thousands of people, these similar experiences. If an attraction can have that, isn't that something that businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs can utilize for their own business, regardless of what they're in?
Absolutely. That's I think the real magic in this, the background of how all of this came together and how James and I really formed this collaboration, this partnership, this friendship was that kind of that discovery. Certainly wasn't planned for. And then the more that we talked and I mean, 3 years, right? The longer that we spent together, the sense really came both of us that we have something really special here. This is a really amazing subject when you start seeing all of the different contributors coming in telling their stories from both sides, right? The experience creators and then the lovers of experience. And we've known for a long time, we meaning industry professionals, know that story drives business. I think anybody in business today understands that it's a pretty big component. What a lot of people don't understand, and what the Walt Disney Company understands quite well, is that story only gets you so far. But if you create an experience that links the brand with the audience, that is story driven, that is magic, because you create an emotional link with that experience between the audience member, and those individuals come back to experience that over and over and over again. And Disney's excellent at doing that. And what I do in my business is I now take that globally, all over the world, and teach other businesses how to do that. So I think that's the hidden magic within this book is that.
Yeah. And Theron, was there as you look at these contributors, which I was honored to even be a small part of the book, and my family has had similar experiences. James and I, um, uncannily, very similar stories. I went to Disney once before I got met my wife, and we've gone many times since. So I caught on later in life, and it's something that's really provided myself and my family with a lot of great
Mm.
experiences, a lot of great family moments. Was there a common theme that you saw with these stories throughout the book, that you saw that kind of tied almost all of them together, like this common thread, if you will?
Uh,
I,
did you? Well,
I'll represent the folks from the industry side. The variety of individuals who contributed, professionals. It was really nice to go back and read through them and see continuity on the side of the people who were a part of kind of making that magic. And what I think is interesting, and this is true in my own life, we're big Disney fans. Our kids grew up with Disney, and one could imagine that as an Imagineer, you could get a bit jaded because you see behind the curtain, you know what it takes. You have all of the horror stories of how difficult it is, when you're working on a billion-dollar project, how difficult and stressful that is. But to actually, we have moments of sheer joy, as James said. You watch Imagineers on, different programming, and they're you know tearing up over the process. So it's nice to have that feeling yourself, and then to see others that way. And I think, James, you may have something similar to say about the contributors from the experience side.
yeah, I just wanted to start with this, which is really interesting, Lawrence. Boy, I started to feel like an Imagineer. I would never obviously have been one, but I always envisioned Imagineers, and Theron has told me about this, how a project goes from what you think it's going to be, and
Mm-hmm.
then you deal with the realities and everything, and it
Right.
becomes something else. That's how the book was. I originally envisioned the book after my wife dissuaded me from making it a white paper, being whimsical. And we talked about it being whimsical. But as I interviewed people, yeah, there's whimsy. I feel there's a lot of whimsy in it, but there's a lot of thoughtful, kind of some deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like the theme that kept popping up over and over again. To people who aren't Disney fans, they may roll their eyes, but it's home. This feeling, and when people say it's their second home, going to a Disney park or going on a Disney cruise or anything, that's not, they're not making that up. They really feel that way. And
Right.
there's that sense of, I kept getting that sense of belonging, that something very powerful and human happens through Disney. I always say, there's a phrase I use. I say, if Disney didn't exist, we'd need to create it,
Right.
because it does something for us. Last night, my son came over, and my wife and I and him are watching Inside Out, and which is a very emotional. movie. We're preparing to go see Inside Out 2.
Right.
But, there's just, it's an animated film, right? Created with computer animation. And yet here we are sitting on a couch, all three together. At one point, our arms around each other. So it's like something's going on there and it's magic. And,
Yep.
my goal was, it's like, I'm asking this question because I'm not sure what the answer is.
Mm.
And let's all figure out if we have an answer. And really, it almost doesn't really matter if we all come up with the same answer. We all kind of know what we're feeling.
Right. Well, it's funny, Theron, that you said about, because the Imagineers know behind the scenes. And, that brings me back. I don't know, James, if you've ever done like a VIP tour before,
Right.
but I'm one of the few people, or my family was one of the few families. We didn't really particularly like the VIP tour, not because it wasn't a great thing. We got on a lot of the rides or the attractions and whatnot. The thing we felt that it detracted from our experience was because we saw behind the scenes, going down and coming in the back way instead of walking down Main Street to make it easier to get on the attractions. We
Yeah.
felt like it lost some of that, luster that we normally have coming in the normal ways. So it was a great experience. We are happy we did it. I don't know that we'd do it again for those reasons, but
Yeah.
pretty interesting. But,
There's a lot of
I,
passion internally to Imagineering. I can tell you that for and against that type of thing. So
yeah, I imagine it would be. So
Lauren,
yeah.
I just wanted to say to that point, this is what's very interesting. I remember at one point we were standing in line for the Skyliner, and we're getting ready to get on it, and it was a long line. And I look over, and there's this guy. He must have been, I don't know, in his 40s, 50s. He's on his tippy toes, like looking over a fence, looking in the back. And it's like there's something so childlike about that. So we really try to balance that in the group. It's like, because we went on the Keys to the Kingdom tour, and it was really a cool
Yeah.
thing. But the way that I have kind of, because I've asked our groups, I said, do you like to know or do you not like to know? Like there's been so much video about the new Tias, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The new Splash Mountain, Tiana's,
Janice.
right? There's been so much video about that. If I had watched video about Flight of Passage, I might not have had that same sense of surprise and wonder.
Right.
So it really comes down to everybody and what they like.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I had the opportunity, I shared my story about the family trip we took to South Africa, which was, fantastic. And I had actually one of our guides from that trip, Craig, he was on episode 18 of the Mitlin Money Mindset. We're still in touch. But the thing that I really liked about the book, and I'm going to tie this back, was the foreword that was written by Disney legend Joe Rohde, who, by the way, from my personal experience, he really pulled off Animal Kingdom so well, because after going on the African safari and actually seeing it live and then looking at Animal Kingdom, when we got to South Africa, it almost looked exactly like Animal Kingdom. So, what could you share about getting him as part of this project? Because I think he was a great addition for the book, for sure.
Yeah, so it happened the way that the whole book happened. Coincidence and connection. I mean, I always think of it like Field of Dreams. Where he's on. If you build it, they will come. That's how I've always envisioned things as I am working on them. And it's like I might not know exactly how I'm going to get there, but I have some kind of sense. So I first had, I'll let Theron give his thoughts on Joe. But the way that I came in contact with Joe, first of all, his attraction brought me to tears, and then I saw him on a webinar. Zeitgeist Productions does a really nice webinar series, and I saw him on one of their webinars, and his quote. My wife was in the other room. His quote was about the emotional power of attraction. It was like he said it to me. So afterwards, I grabbed that quote I sent it to them. I said, "Can I use this in the book?" And we got approval for that. But I still, my dream was always to have him write the forward because it would complete the circle. I had no idea how to make that happen. And then another former Imagineer connected with me. You know, Theron has a, yeah, he won't want to hear this. Close your ears, Theron. Theron's got a really great um, reputation, which is very important in
Sure.
the industry. So if another former Imagineer reached out to me, has turned into a good, good friend, and he used to work with Joe. And so he reached out to Joe on my behalf, and Joe consented to write the forward. So we've had some interaction. He consults with me daily to see if he's on the right path. No, I'm just kidding, Joe. Joke. Joke. But no, he's so honored to have his name. And then you know, and while we were about to publish the book, Disney named him a Disney legend. Very deserving. But so
Yeah, I don't know
there, and
that Disney needed to announce that to really,
I know.
codify that. I think he was there regardless of that
Yeah.
recognition or not. But he's done some
Totally.
great things for them as well. Theron, do you have any comments you'd like to add to that as well?
I was just going to say it's interesting because when you're an Imagineer, you're a former Imagineer, you often get questions if you just work for the Disney company. All over the world, I'll have somebody. Oh, my cousin works at Epcot, and his name is Fred Smith. You ever know him? And I'm thinking to myself, there's 100,000 people who work at Walt Disney World. It's very similar in Imagineering. It's a very tight knit group, but they're divided up all over the world. So even though you may know people, you may not have worked on a project. And when you work together on a project, that's when you really build a much more kind of a bond in a sense, because you go through. It's not easy, right? Projects, so
Mhm.
you build this bond. And although Joe and I had worked off and on together, I just didn't have that relationship with him that the other Imagineer, who's a dear friend of mine, also had. So I'm grateful that we were able to make that connection, and because it was so important, I think, to James to have that complete circle formed, and I think it's done a lot for the book to have him be a part of it, have his words in the book itself.
Amazing. What I want to ask you about next, and we'll start with you, Theron, about this. You know, there were several Disney icons that review quoted the book and took part in the process, right? And I guess, when you're working with a large brand, well-known brand, and some of their leaders, that's not an easy thing to do many times. So maybe you could speak for a moment about how you guys were able to do that from a business perspective. And then maybe James could tell us, kind of what his process was from an author perspective in terms of other authors who might be looking to write about or in reference to a large brand, how they might be able to mirror that same result.
What I would say is that the one thing that all Imagineers have in common is that we are all storytellers. No matter, and I'm sure you've heard that, and your listeners have heard that many times from different sources. But that's it is a reality. We all participate in telling the story throughout the various expertises that we have and the different stages of the project that we're engaged in. And that does something to you when you're engaged with a group of very diverse and diversely skilled individuals, experts, and you're all coming together to tell that story and contributing. So when James was reaching out to these individuals, some names I provided, names other people have provided, there's this common denominator of not just telling the story, but telling their story. And the book itself, really, in a sense, is about experiential storytelling and linking that emotionally. And you can't create the kind of experiences, the kind of attractions like Flight of Passage, unless the creators themselves have that emotional link, that they understand it, they're passionate about it, and they care about it. So I think it was the perfect storm of the right platform for these individuals to want to be a part of, and I think that was the real draw to wanting them to participate in it.
Amazing. What about you, James? What do you have to say about in terms of other authors that might be working with writing about large brands and getting that same buy-in or from the stakeholders that are at that company, which I think is tremendous.
Yeah, well, I do. I want to be really, very clear because my goal was always to be extremely respectful of Disney, because I mean, because and that's really important. I'll explain why. This book, I don't believe it could not have been written from within Disney because it's about Disney. It's a love letter to Disney from its fans. So if Disney came out and said, "Wow, how do we do that?" It's like that doesn't feel real. I don't think it would hit the right note.
Not as
So
genuine.
yeah, exactly. So for me, and again, my background in corporate communications, I knew from the beginning, wanted to be very respectful of the brand. It's not in, the book is not endorsed by Disney. In the future, I hope to have a more formal partnership, but that's in the future. So the first thing is everybody I talk to who's in the book is a former Disney executive, cast member, Imagineer, etc. I would love to talk to, current too, but again, I'm being very respectful. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is, and this is really where I think this is where for authors who are working with brands, the first thing is I made it very organic. I wanted to do it organically. It takes time, but you build that reputation of, I'm going to be respectful of your brand. I'm a huge fan of your brand. I know about your brand. I've taken the time to learn about your brand. I understand it, and I'm one of your biggest cheerleaders, of your brand. I think that's just first to establish that. And then the second thing that I would tell any author is that if somebody tells you you won't be able to get somebody to take part in something you're trying to do, I'd say don't even listen.
Mhm.
Don't even listen. Because there were so many times where I would reach out to somebody where other people would say, wait, what? Why? And it's like, if you look on the back of the book, there's a quote from Robert Sherman's son, Robbie Sherman. Robert Sherman, one of the Sherman brothers, who wrote, some of the most famous Disney songs.
Mhm.
The other day, I don't know if you can see back here, there's boxes of books. Those are books that are going out to contributors and other people. So the other day, I was sitting at my desk writing out a book for Robbie Sherman. Just send, there you go. So I was sending, yep. And so we wrote out yours. So I'm writing out his address to send 2 books to him. If I'd said, hey, should I send? What do you think? Do you think I could get a quote from? Nah. So I would tell any author, first of all, that has got to go.
Mhm.
Um, the way that's why I say what was right over the shoulder saying, oh yeah, when I wanted to synchronize music to a cartoon, they said no way. When I wanted to create a full feature out of anime, no way. When I wanted, on so
I'm with
many,
you.
right? And I
Yeah.
know that, Lawrence, I think that's where you and I really connected because we have a very similar approach. I mean, you've got a really strong brand, and so I think, I mean, you definitely get it, but you also are very respectful in how you do things. And I think if you're just respectful and kind, you can do anything.
I agree. Listen, I had Dr. Mark Penning from Disney. He's still employed there. He basically runs their whole global initiative on the
Right.
for ecology and the animals. I mean, he's brilliant, and I invited him to be on the show, and people were like, "Oh, he works for Disney. You're not going to be able to get him on. He's not going to be able to say anything." We had a great conversation. He was episode 107, and the episode was fully run by Disney. And they didn't endorse it and say you could say it's Disney certified, but they let the episode go out into the world because why wouldn't they? It's a great representation of what they're doing, from an environmental standpoint and with the animal.
Mm.
It's fascinating. So to your point, James, you just gotta, you know, try, right? It's worth the try, and if you don't ask, it'll definitely be a no, but
Yeah,
ask
and
in a respectful way. So
that's so well said, and that's the next step. Is I've got in my head, I've got a vision for where this goes next, and that's where this goes next is to approach Disney and see if something can happen. Here's my long term. I've never said this publicly, so this is it. This is the scoop,
all
right?
right.
My long term vision, which I worked on with Gina, my wife, is that one day you'll walk through the parks, the Disney parks, and where you have kiosks for, DVC, you have other kiosks, you will have a How Does Disney Do That kiosk where you will be able to stop and provide your story. And then your stories will be added to thousands and millions of other stories, and it'll create this collage, right?
Okay.
just
Yeah.
like just like they do in other ways. So that's really the goal. I and so
Well, let,
there's
let's
there,
so let's run with that for a second, James, right? Because I want to help you in that mission. You've just laid the stake in the ground as far as what you want to accomplish. So let's help you do that. For others, listeners, people who are listening right now, people who would love to get you their how did Disney do that story, whether it be used today or for your kiosk in the future. How can they go about doing that?
they can go to howdoesdisneydothat.com. And there's a form right on the site where they can send in their initial story. They don't have to worry about writing the whole thing out. If they just send enough of the story, we'll follow up with them and do a longer interview to get kind of the details of it. And we've got the next book in the series is going to be starting up soon, which is going to be on Disney cast and crew members. Um, so they can get it that way, and they can also join our groups on Facebook and LinkedIn. And many of the contributors and Lawrence, you're a member of the group. Many of the contributors to this book came from those
Right.
groups, and those groups are very special because we've intentionally created them as communities to give the feeling of being at Disney. Where you go in and it's like, yes, they're positive. They're not, we'll talk about real stuff, but they're positive and people care about each other and there's kindness and it's just really cool stuff happening. So
Well, hopefully we just got you a little boost to the number of stories that'll help fulfill that
that'd be awesome.
kiosk dream. So, listen, we're all about joy on this show, and we've talked a lot of things that bring a lot of joy to a lot of people. So we ask each of our guests the same final question, which I'll start with you, James, and then move on to Theron in regards to his answer. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
Well, I'm not just saying this because I'm on this podcast,
Mhm.
but this podcast is a great example. I love it
Thank you.
because it's true. I always wanted in my life to get to the point where I was doing something I truly cared about, and making this everything I do in terms of my work and my career is what I most want to do because I really believe in it. So
Mhm.
being on this and talking about and Lawrence, we've had a good long relationship. I was really able to hear your wonderful story and about family and stuff. So it's just that to me is what it's all about.
I appreciate that. We have a lot of parallels to our stories as well, which make it interesting. So, Theron, what did you do today that brought you joy?
Well, I had an amazing video of my newest grandson that came over the weekend, and I had a chance to look at that again. He just learned to roll over. So, anyways, I love that. Three grandkids, and I'm loving that stage of life right now. The stories that we're going to be able to tell through the eyes of those little ones is going to be amazing.
Amazing. I love that. And so we'll have all of your information in the show notes. I know you have an offer for the listeners as well, which, I'll let you share that now, but we'll have that in the show notes as well. But in the meantime, if you could tell folks about that offer, James, and then also if people want to learn more about the book, find it, purchase it, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so I think if you just, I would say just today, right away, what you could do is you could go to our website, howdoesdisneydothat.com. You can go join up on our groups. I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. If you want to purchase the book, obviously, Amazon is a great place to purchase it. I think we are still a top seller in Disney travel books and barnesandnoble.com. But also, if you want to get a signed copy, with a special bookmark. I will send a special free shipping offer we have for select groups to you, Lawrence, and you can provide that information just to your listeners, and they can get it that way through Rivershore Press, which is my publisher.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I appreciate you both taking out time out of your busy schedules for doing this. I love the book, and I'm going to be sharing it with the rest of the family because I think it's one of those things that everybody could read and learn a little bit something, whether it be about Disney, about business. I think that there are so many factors there. So thanks again, and enjoy the day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lawrence.
Appreciate it, Lawrence.